So the first question, what makes a turntable an instrument?
My first thought about a turntable being an instrument is that it makes sound. I think that's quite a simple one. What I love about it being an instrument, and what interested me in using it to create new sounds, was when I first came across it being used in an interesting way by Philip Janek at an afternoon concert at the Royal College of Art. And Philip Janek came on with two dusty old record players, a suitcase of battered old music going round with a couple of little effects. And he really used the instrument to take out bits and spin them into another world. I was studying architecture at the time, and it was very much a flow that he got, a soundscape. It was durational, and it took me in new places. My friends were like, "What's all this?" And I was like, "What's all this?" So what makes an instrument is that, for me, I can make new music with it, in mining the grooves of any ancient sound that you might happen to come across. So as a found sound instrument, I find it extremely versatile.
And what distinguishes the turntable from other instruments?
Well, from my perspective, other instruments are very much, well, my experience of them was very much prescribed. So as a child, I learnt the flute, I was okay. I learnt the piano, I was the head chorister at school and in the church choir. And in learning those classical instruments, I got frustrated on reflection, I can see, by the prescribed nature of traditional music or pure music. And I didn't react well to that, because I had to copy it again and again, make sure it was correct. And that frustrated me greatly. So obviously experimental musicians use all sorts of instruments and techniques to create their new sound worlds. But for me, when I hit the turntable, it was very much about creating happy accidents, in that finding an old record, randomly putting it on, maybe in 3 places with my magical machines, and seeing what happened and responding and improvising. So for me, it's an improvising tool. And in working with classical musicians in the last 20 years, who generally aren't adept at making up their own rules, it turns out that that's what I adore about life, is harnessing those improvisations, those accidents, and creating new pathways, new sound explorations that are engaging and emotional and evocative. So there's no correct way to play a turntable unless you're a hi-fi buff and you spent $300,000 on your spring-suspended turntable to make it sound exactly correct. I've done the opposite, which is what I do with most of my work, which is take an idea, turn it round, have another look at it, not in a rebellious way, just it opens up avenues to do things beautifully, but incorrectly. That's what I think the difference between that turntable and an instrument might be.
And what specific characteristics of the turntable are you drawn to, and why?
When I saw Philip play, he also showed a video of Vinyl Requiem, which is 180 turntables, old ones like that one over there with flip-up lids, and he played them all at once, and I could see the correlation between like having lots of record players and maybe doing the opposite, which was creating one record player with multiple access points on it, like 3 arms. And I've forgotten the question.
What specific characteristics of the turntable are you drawn to, and why?
So the fact that vinyl as a medium, for me, is the most tangible, accessible way to access vibrations and pre-recorded musics in one flat, big surface. It's different from cassettes and all other ways that you can see it all, you can touch it all. It's a physical machine that is accessible. So I wanted to create a way to manipulate that found sound in as many ways as I could imagine in my little brain. Now, I created my ThreeArm record player in '97, which was pre-internet for me, and I thought, oh, I'm sure other people have maybe done multiple arm record players in history, all the way back to the 30s or something. But I couldn't research it. I didn't want to research it, so I just thought, what can a machine do? And maybe I could have 3 records at 3 different levels, and I could play it at any speed at all, backwards or forwards. And, you know, it became lots of tricks. But I thought, if I make a record player, I'll make it as maximal, maximize the potential of its manipulation. And I thought, and it looked quite cool, looked interesting. So I made postcards and posted it to people and got out on the road and started doing concerts. So that's what attracted me to using a record player.
So experimental turntablism specifically as a practice seems to mainly reflect on and places emphasis on the medium itself. What are your thoughts on that?
The medium being the vinyl?
Or, yeah, turntable, you know, the object and...
The cultural context?
No.
No.
The actual medium itself, so I guess the sounds that are innate to that medium, as opposed to...
Is that a different answer to the one I just gave, do you think? Is that, or am I going to repeat myself a bit? I'm thinking repeating myself a bit.
I guess like a lot of your music is reflecting on those, like the sounds that are specific to that.
Yeah.
To a turntable, you know, you're bringing out those textures and things, you're highlighting those, and that seems to be like a thing that a lot of people that I'm going to be speaking to do.
In all technologies,
Yeah.
and particularly the record player, imperfection gives it its character. Like, no humans are perfect. All our imperfections give us our character, and absolutely what interests me about finding old dusty records is that they sound old and dusty, I guess. I'm not a purist, so you know, when enjoying, you know, I choose to use a 1959 Dansette record player that doesn't sound mint. When I put the records on it, it sounds a bit woolly. And those characteristics of the medium, of the crackles and the pops, I think are definitely the core to vinyl, and that gives it its character. So I amplify those mistakes in the medium and create its beauty, or draw out its beauty from accepting its faults. Actually, that's what imbues me to it. My emotional concept to it is that it sounds nostalgic. I love nostalgia. Some people may not. I think with current technology, it's difficult to have a nostalgia because it's also sounds the same because it's so very good this decade. But when you use an old Picnic record player from the 70s, it sounds different from an old Technics from the 90s or 1950s Dansette. They all have a personality. And then you buy your vinyl, and that may be cheap from Bulgaria from a market if I'm doing a concert in Bulgaria. And so vinyl lends its own, it brings a sense of antique, sense of history through the imperfections in its sound, which I'd say I amplify or extemporize with, or other fancy words.
I'm just getting a little bit of
Russell.
yeah.
Okay.
It's moved up a little
Yep.
bit. So.
Maybe I was tugging on that a bit. I'm amplifying the errors there.
So next bit's more about the history, just seeing what you know.
Okay.
about it, I guess.
I think I need to do a bit of a history dump on my brain. Before you ask the question.
Yeah.
So, Laszlo Moholy-Nagy was doing stuff. Milan
Yeah.
Kniznak, what's his name?
Yeah. Milan.
What's his surname? How do you pronounce that?
Kniznak, I think.
Kniznak.
I mean, I don't know how to pronounce it, but that's what.
Milan Kniznak.
Yeah.
Make a joke of that. And Markley and Jack
Yeah.
and Otomo and Martin Tetro. Just going jocking my brains. Those are the main ones that I think I have up there. Okay.
Yeah. So, yeah, a few more, I guess, John Cage's sculptural pieces and Pierre Schaefer's.
Yeah, thank you. Recaps there. Good. All good. Essential.
So, obviously, the use of the turntable as an instrument is as old as the medium itself. How much of this early history of the practice were you aware of before working with turntables yourself?
So in 1996 is when I first encountered Philip Jack playing with his old dusty record players. And that's what switched me on to understanding that there may be a genre out there that he drew on. And with the Royal College of Art library and no internet, I found a few books, wrote my dissertation on sound, space and place. And so I discovered the origins. And I always briefly dip into origins and history, rather than delving deep into them and trying to replicate them or something. So I became aware of Imaginary Landscape #1, was it? With the baritone sine waves at the town hall in New York with John Cage. John Cage is such a totem in our thing. I've always tried to put it to one side. He definitely opened many, many doors. But the people that followed him that I bumped into on the road were like Martin Tatro, doing his very humorous, very recognisable sound. London Musicians Collective. Martin Tetro did a concert, and they're very recognisable sounds. And in the early 90s, I loved electronica and the orb and sample-based sound pieces, so I was very much drawn to that. Very much drawn to Milan Kniznak, who melted records, so I tried a bit of that. Laszlo Moholy-Nagy, I now realise did like 7 stack record players and things. I didn't really know back then, but I knew before I did my multiple record players that there must have been precedent, and it's there. And our current godfather, which is Christian Markley, very intelligent, concise, artist-based musician that, my favourite works by him were where he kind of did collages of sound, like on his records album. My favourite piece is like a 15-minute thing rather than a quick ditty with Maria Callas or something. Those very jokey things. I responded well to jokes. I love funny titles and having humour in my work, but doing it really well and seriously, and it always works. My installations never break down. And Philip Jack is the one that I always go back to, and it's quite an amazing story, because when he did the performance in front of us at Royal College of Art, he took a break And I thought, well, I must go and speak to him. And I went down and said, hi, what have you got there? Because I didn't know about guitar pedals, making loops and things, or anything. And I said, do you make a living from it? And his first album was just out on Touch Records, who were presenting the afternoon with Panasonic and with Chris Watson. And that's what founded my whole future, which is using electricity, like a Panasonic, to manipulate, using field recordings, because a microphone can capture the architectural spaces around us and the way we use our ears, rather than just our eyes to process the world, and Philip with his 2 record players. And so I chatted to him, I introduced myself, and I thought, well, I'll make this 3-arm record player after the meeting. I went home and phoned my mum and said, oh, I've just seen this gig and I'm going to do this 3-arm record player. She goes, oh, who was playing? I said, oh, Philip Janek. And my mum said, what, Phil? I said, what do you mean Phil? I said, well, yes, Phil is in our cottage in Normandy at the minute with Mary, his wife, and he's known you since you were born. I'm like, what? I just met him. I introduced myself, and it turns out he's my oldest friend on earth. And we went on holiday to Cornwall in like 79 or something like that. So it struck me that, because I was inspired by his 180 record player piece to do the opposite, which is 1 record player with multiple arms. I've always really, really tried to not steal ideas from people, but to bounce off them. So if I ever meet them, I can have a good chat and they won't feel infringed upon, which was exactly the right place to start, because Philip, my oldest friend, it turns out, was inspiring my future. And we've performed over the years around the world together. So those are my turntable origins. Yeah.
Sort of covers, I guess there's other artists from other disciplines, like artistic disciplines. So, because you spoke about Boyd Rice and like William S. Burroughs and people like that. Were they an influence in any way, and like how did they?
For me personally, Boyd Rice and Burroughs weren't at the epicenter of my thoughts when I began this journey. They opened doors that enabled me to become who I was, I guess, like a dominoes in history. But I'm aware of Burroughs and his cut-up collage random techniques, and I'd say more than him, someone like Duchamp, who enabled everything to be anything. I've been in concerts at Stein in Amsterdam when people told me that what I was doing, playing other people's records, is my new music. An older gentleman stood up at the back of the concert at Stein, started arguing with me that I hadn't thanked all the people on the records for playing them, because I took my 3 young friends from my town here to the concert in Amsterdam, and I was thanking them and other people. So he actually had an argument with me about why I hadn't referenced all the people on the records. So I asked him, who did I play? Could you recognise anything I played? And he said, that's erroneous. That's not useful information. It doesn't matter who you played. You need to reference them all. So at a place like Stein, which is an avant-garde experimental place, to have an argument about whether anything is art or not I found very weird. And we did get quite close in our debate. But all you had to do is usually pull Duchamp out, and I thought most things would evaporate into the ether and smile again. So those are my thoughts on that.
Because there were a couple of was it On Off and Wow?
Yeah.
Which were you in an interview I read that you were talking about doing something that was opposite to what Boyd Rice was doing.
Okay, was that? Okay, tell me more.
Well, he was putting the
hot extra hole. Yeah.
And you sort of flipping that.
Yeah, highly specific, indeed. So from '97, when I created 3-arm record player onwards, I was interested in exploring cutting techniques for records as a little area of creativity. What could I do that is different to precedent? And Boyd Rice's infamous multi-hole 7-inch, which was here a moment ago, you know, is another totem of vinyl art. So I thought, okay, so maybe I could make one record that the sound was off center on the disc rather than the hole. It was a simple moving on or the opposite of. So that's what I did. So we just made another hole in the cutting room and then cut a normal thing so that I can get it down if you want.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is one of the fruits of my vinyl cutting technique phase earlier on in my life, and this is the magic. Does that catch the light? Which way? Which is best? Can you see the?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, this is extremely niche, and I hope you're adoring this. But there's one hole in the middle. Well, there's a circular drone. It's like a long thing that ends in a lock groove. And then in the cutting technique, that's where I put the extra hole in. So this second one, which is off center, is positioned on the record surface. And what that does is that this one goes, with this one, because of its asymmetric cut, the bias and the speed of the needle changes, and it makes basically like a sine wave out of. The sound is actually the same as this one, but when you play it, it goes. Not everyone thinks that's beautiful, and I guess it's a bit more scientific than emotional. But there you go. And I made a custom record player, which we have over here, we'll see, just to play this disc. I have a nice photograph of that, actually. So that's my exhibition at the British Sculpture Society, I believe, which is a record player just made to play my 2-groove record. On and off center.
So, in the, I guess between the 60s and 80s, the practice took several trajectories. One main one being within reggae and hip hop culture, and then the other sort of more experimental side. How would you see? Because obviously there's a lot of techniques that are used that are similar in both, and how would you see them as being distinct from one another?
Is the first distinction that comes to mind between Grandmaster Flash and more experimental side is the beat, because I love beats, I love dancing, and just before starting my triphonic revolutions, I was trying to make beat music myself, but I failed because my brain doesn't follow the rules of rhythm when it comes to composing, because it's boom boom ch boom boom. So the DJs that were able to beat juggle, I can't beat match. I can't DJ properly like a club DJ. That doesn't interest me as a DJ. I'm about the cultural collage more than anything else. So the New York cut up were making people groove. I desperately wish I could make music that would make people put their arms in the air and jump up and down and get on a podium, because that's what I like to do in my own when I go out. But weirdly enough, my own vinyl techniques seem to have done the opposite, because I was unable to do beat music every time I tried. I'm not particularly interested in all the techniques myself, practicing the crabs and all that. That's not the vinyl turntable I'm into. And in the late 90s, I got put into the turntablist genre because I use a turntable. But I was playing events like for the Wire magazine where the Scratch Pickles would turn up, or outfits like that, I can't remember which one it was, who would do all their incredible technical manipulations. And then I come on and I kind of make everyone lie down and go to sleep. Because turns out that that's what my brain and my tools enabled me to do. So I think 60s to 80s, there's a duality there, of which I turn into the sonic collage rather than beat collage camp. Would you say?
Yep.
Yeah.
Were you aware of, I guess, like people like Larry Levan and Walter Gibbons and that whole scene in New York and what they were doing with techniques?
Absolutely had no idea about the phenomenal achievements of Larry Levan and Walter Gibbons and those people who created scenes, who brought people to them and made them put their arms in the air. If you talk to Philip Jeck, he'll tell you the origins of Walter Gibbons when he first, I think, saw him over in New York in the early 80s. I only came across all these legends, characters, when I became a party DJ myself 10 years ago, when my kids were young. And now I make people of all ages, up to 96 down to 1 year old, put their arms in the air every weekend at private parties around my area. That's when I really got interested in DJing, because when I used to tour a lot in the early this century, and I'd turn up with my interesting record players, people would say, "Oh, I'm a DJ." I'm like, well, I'm sorry, I don't want to be pedantic or cause an argument, but I'm not a DJ when I'm on stage doing a concert. I'm creating my own music for you there, and like I say, the best thing is when people lie down and go to sleep. If they hear snoring in some of my gigs, that's a compliment. So, having started Lucky Dip Disco, I then became very interested in DJing, because that's a totally different art. So Larry Levan doing his things, or whoever did the seamless mixing, they were pioneers, and I wanted to learn about them. So I'd read the history of DJing. Last night, DJ Saved My Life, phenomenal book, another book called Record Players, who interview all those DJs. Really amazing books. And those are about the only books I've read this decade, because they fascinate me, and that's where I learned about the scene in America particularly. And I've loved learning about it all. And my own take on that is that I've tried again to do the opposite of most DJs. Because Lucky Dip Disco is all about turning my box of records around. I've got like 257 inches. Let's say I'm doing a 40th birthday party for someone or all their mates. And I turn the box around. I also have digital playlists of all other music. I've got 100 years of great dancing music from the Charleston and all the way back to 1694, Pachelbel's Canon in D, where we dance around with kids pretending to be at Hampton Court Palace with King Henry VIII dancing. And so when I turn it around, I say, look, I sometimes say, I'm not playing anything until someone comes and chooses a record. So turning that ego of what most people I've been told is the ego of the DJ, where you hear of crying brides because the DJ didn't play their records that they like at their wedding. I thought, well, obviously I've got an ego. I'll just share it and share my passion for dancing music. So, so my version of DJing is about having a conversation with the dancers, with the guests, running around the room, collecting all the relatives up and getting them all in there and taking great photographs of them and creating a party, because I can't be a club DJ to save my life. A genre. What kind of DJ are you? I'm a house DJ. People would say, was that all you play? Just house? Well, I must really limit the amount of work you can do. Because like I did disco, like I did 61 parties last year. The majority of those were for 5-year-olds, which is a special age, because they're old enough to sit still, to concentrate. And I start off with a gramophone, and I talk about vibrations, about how the air goes into your ears and your brains and down to your feet. And we wind up Jerry Lee Lewis, we start doing some shaking. And I teach them about sound. And then we just have a full-on mad party with all genres, ending in a proper rave. And I get all the parents involved, which has been, for the last 10 years, an amazingly rewarding career. Totally opposite from my serious sound artist guys, which took a while to navigate through to. But it's local. I keep the community happy. Now children and adults wave at me as I drive around in my red van. And yeah, sense of community has been amazing. While also travelling abroad to play for, I played for 300 people in Milan a couple of Monday nights ago. It was on a Monday night, and grandmothers came. And it was in this incredible auditorium where they kitted it out with 50 handmade speakers of all types and linked it to this enormous mixer with which you could change every speaker in the hall. And then it's played in the dark. This is really a magical gig, because it wasn't the stage presence, which we'll get onto with my record players. So I did a soundscape in the dark, mixing it all. I learned it all in a day. I drew all speakers on the mixer board so that I could remember which one was which. Did this incredible diffusion, absolute dream gig, underneath the centre of Milan, right next to the Duomo. It was magical. But while I'm thinking about it, having created a very visual 3-arm or 2-arm record players and touring, it, for me, became, particularly with a 3-arm record player, like a bit of an albatross. You know, a lot of artists, musicians would say the one thing they're famous for is the thing they have to perform and do every time, and it weighs them down a bit. And I felt that I really had to do these 3-arm tricks with my special successful record player, which actually what I want to do on stage in a concert is focus on the sound composition. So that's why I made a 2-arm record player that actually doesn't have to go in the hold. My 3-arm record player is 15 kilos, it's heavy, it's fragile. So I made this 2-arm one. And now I'm down to I'll show you my custom 1-arm record player with varies speed on it. Because it's very much the sound journey, having accidents, but not being about people spectating on, can I hear the 3 arms doing their thing? Because actually, you might not know what arm's playing what. But it was something to look at, which was good for the audience and good for a postcard to get me gigs.
So the next bit is about creative approaches. You have spoken about quite a few things, but I'll sort of ask them
Sure.
again, I guess.
Yeah.
So you've spoken about like what the catalyst for you to start working with turntables was, but you trained as an architect. How did that influence your work with turntables?
Training in architecture, I was very fortunate to not go to academic institutions that would teach you how to draw a window frame correctly. I went to Manchester Poly, which was very much practical university, as it were. And then I went to the Royal College of Art, which I chose because it's a place with these multidisciplines that cross-fertilise. And when I got there, the architecture course was in disarray. Everyone spent all their energy complaining about the course. And I saw that as an opportunity to go and do what you like. Take the kind of rather Wild West vibe they had there at the beginning of my 2 years. So I got into graphic design, and I went to other photography departments, and I went around. And while I was there, I was able to have this switch turn on in my brain when I was really, really wanting to make dancing music with a, TB303s or whatever. And I tried DJing in the art bar on Thursdays. People didn't dance because the music I liked, they didn't like. I don't know. My best friend Dave the Rave, and I tried that for a while. And I said, oh, I'll make music when I've finished architecture, I said to someone. And they reflected on me, well, why don't you do it now? And I thought, well, in that little conversation, I realised that sound creates space, and music is sound, and anything can be music. And this bingo light, it came out top here, came on, and I thought, well, maybe I can, instead of trying to design the next art gallery or museum or whatever we're all told to do every term, I could look at architecture from hearing rather than seeing. And what I love about architecture, and it really inspired, my final manipulation years, was the context, the site specific. So when I go to different countries, I collect vinyl from those places and use them in the concerts. And sound creates space and place. Well, you can position people in a concert and take them around and through avenues and journeys. And seeing that concert with Philip, I explored my architecture designs through like making solid concrete buildings that were actually transparent to sound, like the Inside Out building. So when you go into it, you expect that this concrete building was going to sound different to the outside, like most buildings do. But actually, one way, the sound just went straight through it. So I was exploring sound, and that's when I saw Philip play, and that's when I combined those things, and I graduated, and I thought, well, I don't want a job in architecture because that's 9 to 5 or running your own office, and it's 95% rules and regulations about how you can or cannot design everything. And that's not, and I thought if I just hold off on the proper job for as long as I can, maybe that'll make me find options to go and get paid to perform and exhibit and do artwork. And it's this perfect storm of, this is about 97 now, when I created the ThreeArm record player. That's when kind of cheap flights arrived. That's when my internet connection arrived, and cheap phones. And instead of doing things by fax, you could now research, book flights, and afford to tour. I was on the doorstep of Europe, with its currently then in the late 90s excellent arts funding for culture, which is terrifyingly badly axed in the last 20 years slowly. And it was cheap rents. So I had a cheap rent. Everything was affordable and manageable and possible at that time in my life, there where I was. So I maximised that and rode the wave, and I'm still riding it 20 years later. So the ThreeArm evolved. I toured. Opportunities arose, which were all site-specific, context-specific. And people started to hear about me and invite me, and off I went. That's one answer.
Great. No, that's great. So I guess, could we talk specifically about the ThreeArm record player?
Yep.
And the process of making it. You've spoken about.
Yeah, I've got good tales in there.
yeah, you've spoken about, you know, why you wanted to make it, but
Yeah.
I guess
Yeah. The actual making of it.
making of it, and
Yeah.
what you hope to get from it. And
Yeah.
sorry, I'm just going to change, zoom in a little bit.
So the opportunity lay, the idea came to create my own record player that I could manipulate found sounds in as many ways as possible across these various surfaces, and maybe one higher arm, one lower arm, various speeds, and forwards and backwards. There's not a lot else you can do with a record. Maybe if I make my own machine. I've always been quite good with my practical creative hands, making good use of the things that I find to assemble new objects. So I thought I'll set about creating a 3-arm record player. I didn't know what it was going to be called. So the beginning of that story is electronics. Oh dear. Now, I don't know anything about that. So I went to a shop on Edgware Road in London called Henry's Audio, which is an emporium of electronic components. And it's a bit like a proper Maplin with serious stuff out the back. And my tale of that is quite cool. There's the guy at the back very much reminded me of the guy that trained the Karate Kid. He looked just like him. And he stood there behind his chaotic shop desk with his drawers of components behind him. And I went and I said, hello, I don't suppose, I'm trying to make a 12-volt motor go backwards and forwards at any speed at all. I don't know if you can help me do that. And he said, no, go away and ask someone and just ask me for a list of components. I thought, oh God, nothing transpired. I couldn't find anyone else who knew about electronics in my friend's circle. So I think I went back maybe 3 times. And on the 3rd time, he goes, all right. Handed me over a little plastic bag of resistors and varipotentiometers and switches and relays and stuff. I'm like, thank you very much. Thank you. Do you know how to wire them together? He's got a little yellow post-it, went, there you go, mate. I said, oh, there's your money. Thanks very much. I went home and I got my architect's drawing board out. I laid them all out. I didn't know what they were. I literally spent a week trying to wire with crocodile clips every different type of thing back together. What might decipher the Egyptian code that he'd written for me, until I could make the motor go backwards and forwards at any speed down to very slow. So then it was much easier for me. I got my box made, found some bits, found some old fake Technics arms, charity shops, bits and bobs, and set about in my bedroom manufacturing my future. And then on my 27th birthday, July the 14th, 97, I premiered it, and it worked. And my architect friends, the Urban Salon, were having soirees, so I was one of the soirees. We invited other people around, and the great thing about that night was their little office was in a courtyard in Borough in London, and their little tiny office they had was in a courtyard. And the next building next door was the recording studio of Stockade and Walkman, which are doing Kylie Minogue and Jason Donovan and people like Rick Astley and people like that. So the first record I played was a Jason and a Kylie, because if you play Jason quickly, it sounds exactly like Kylie, and if you play Kylie slowly, it sounds exactly like Jason Donovan. Or no, Rick Astley. Sorry, Rick Astley. So they all popped out and said, what the hell's going on here? Maybe I could cross-fertilise and get in the pop world. Didn't quite happen. So, and I was playing a Michael Jackson Thriller record that night with 3Arms. And my new girlfriend, who'd soon to become my wife, her friend said, what's the point in a 3-arm record player? And my girlfriend said, well, when he played Michael Jackson's, he can't dance to it because it wasn't in rhythmic beat. So that's how that's a technical tale from the construction years of my triphonic turntable. Do you want to know anything else?
What did you make when you started making things with it?
What music? What sound? Sonic?
Yeah.
So having made this machine to manipulate found sound as many ways as possible, what does it do? And that's when I discovered the night before my opening show about the Rick Astley and Kylie Minogue. So I thought that was pretty funny. Great context-specific architecture years. And that also the night before I did my first show, I was, seeing what it could do. It's a physical machine, the chance of what's lying around all coming together in that moment. And my mum and dad weren't particularly musical. We didn't have music on all the time growing up. But I did have these poetry records from my mum. She loved the poets reading their own work. And there's the Four Quartets by T.S. Eliot. So, okay. And I put that on. And it turned out to be a prose poem all about time present and time past. Or perhaps present in time future. I thought, my God, that is exactly what I've built. This time delay thing. I thought, well, if I just put the three stylus slightly after each other in the same groove, you'll get this magical collage of the three poems entwining all about hearing time present and time future, or perhaps present and time past, in one take. And that is, to this day, the first piece I made with it. The most apparent sonic realization of what this triphonic turntable is. It says what it is on the tin through 1948, a mono recording by T.S. Eliot, triphonicized. And if people want to know what triphonic turntable is, it's his master's voices, which was probably the first track on my first self-released LP, which unfortunately was cut by the wonderful King Records in New Zealand, who do a lot of the lays to this day, but it came back in mono. Because originally, the right arm goes time, present, and the left arm goes time, present, and the middle arm goes time. And you put it across the stereo channels, and you get the spatialization. But on a mono LP, that doesn't really work. And that mono LP, I did actually cut it so it plays from the middle to the outside, because I'm always trying to maximize my thoughts. But having made that demonstration reality of what this machine does, then I just used it to create happy accidents. To maybe put a 7-inch away of the stylus, so you get two stylus very close in the same groove in time, so you can kind of fade between them. It is in the Guinness Book of Records as the world's most versatile record player, because that was a boyhood dream come true. And I mentioned that when I went to gigs, and people would say, "Oh, have you heard about all these other record players with different configurations?" I go, "All right, but does it do that? And does it do that?" And I thought, okay, to shut them all up, I set the world record for breaking the most number of records in 30 seconds, and did a world music LPs, and I did a gig beforehand using the world records, and then set the world record for breaking the most number of records afterwards, which is me being silly, juvenile, childish, thoughtful, and fun. And that was on my 33 and a third birthday. I don't think you can do a lot more silly and clever than that. And people clapped. They laughed. It was okay.
Why do you think other turntables like that haven't been built since?
I completely understand your question about why haven't other record players been built like that, because one answer is, my extremely magical mother, who's very influential to me, she'd go, well, Janek, why don't you go into business building 3-arm record players? I'm like, I'm not sure what the point of a 3-arm record player is, apart from me. And he said, what is the point of a 3-arm record player? I can only see that it's useful in my situation, exactly for me then in that moment. Why hasn't anyone built an even more amazing one? Well, there's an artist in America who copied me and built them as very beautiful objects. Mine is very much in the vein of Technics. Those are the components and the genre I was in. But the artist, Sean someone, he's made some really beautiful cut together ones that are visually fantastic, but he never doesn't play them. Right. Doesn't do gigs with them or release albums with them or anything like that. And actually there seems to be, to me, quite a low amount of people that do what Philip and I and the other interviews you're speaking to do, which is make crackly, beautiful, textural, evocative, emotional music from old records. People sample. Sampling to me is quite different from what I do, or there's a variation on it. Because sampling to me is a recognizable something. It's taken verbatim almost. Maybe it has a very important cultural connection, like Good Times being taken into the hip hop scene. That's the clear example of sampling. And I love the Orb and people like that who would take, I don't know, that Willy Wonka one on Aphex Twin as well, Future Art of Dreams and things. I love those verbatim copies of sound taken out of context to create new work. But what I try and do mostly is obscure and take it as a source to spin new things. Sometimes it's a bit recognisable, but on the whole. So there are very few cases of other people making different arm record players. Etienne Robin, who runs Stahlplatt, made a 4-arm record player, and he said it's much better than Janek Schaefer's 3-arm record player. Cheeky fucker. He said it to my face, so it's fine, we are friends. He did release my Random Play LP, which was a big milestone for me, which is a record that you can put on any place and it's different every time you play it. There's precedent for things like that, but possibly the only purpose-built Random Play LP, rather than just a weird object. And Martin Tétrault did a 4-arm one, which very much about the mechanics of the machine rather than playing sounds off records. But I think because it's extremely niche. And I've always known that if you want to succeed at something, don't try and become a football star, because everyone's trying to do that. Choose a genre that means something to you that's, well, there's not a million people trying to compete for the top place, and you'll stand out and make a go of it. I've made enough of a go of it to travel the world. I've been extremely lucky, and the community that I've found on the road has just been the most positive bunch of people who all do it for passion and not for money. Now, maybe they don't make lots of other record players with 3 arms because there's no bloody money in it, right? Most people want to make lots of money, or some of them. So on the back of my ideas, I played the Sydney Opera House. I've toured most continents, played every country in Europe, and only met nice people. I've never been ripped off. On the whole, people write nice things, favourable things, positive, encouraging things about my kind of work, and artists like me, which sometimes is a bit too sickly. There's no critique, not a lot like The Wire. It's a very positive magazine, not like The NME or Melody Maker that make a trait of slagging people off. So I've been very fortunate to have done all that and hung on to the edge smiling as I do it to this day. So maybe that's why.
And what records have you used that on, and do you still use it now in work?
What record have I used it on? Okay, so the triphonic turntable was created in '97 in an era of a different airports were different 20 years ago. My first gig abroad, I had my 15 kilo triphonic turntable. I had another flight case with a very heavy 50s record player, and I had a coffin size flight case on wheels of all my electronics and studio processing gears. I took those 3 boxes and my luggage to get on a plane to Germany. I got to Heathrow Airport. I stood on my coffin and I skated up to the check-in desk and said, "Hi, I'm doing my first gig abroad. I don't suppose you can stick all this on, can you?" The big case was 45 kilos, being technical here, but that's absolutely not possible now. And they said, "Yeah, okay, put it on all for free." There and back, thank God. And I played at the art house in Berlin, an amazing building in the park. So the 3-arm record player was from 97 to 2002. So it was on the road for 5 years. Like I say, I make postcards of it. It's very photogenic. It got me out. It got me through doors, opened avenues for me. And then inside it is like a spaghetti junction of wires, totally terrifying. And if you go there to a gig and it's not quite working, to open it up is really scary. So that's when I made my 2-arm record player that's briefcase size, I can carry on as luggage. And that went for 10 years, from 2002 to 2012. I stopped using that around then and did more work with radio transmitters and portable radios and things, spatialization around the venue. But as of this month, I now have boiled it down to this thing here, which is a beautiful Crosley remake of the Soundberger from the 80s. And this is, practicality is absolutely at the heart of all things that we can and not do in life. This goes into my main single flight case now. So I pack my record player inside my my box of tricks for my concerts. Now that is life-changing. You can actually still go abroad and do gigs. But I had it modified. There's my found sound. I asked anyone around here, anyone know anything about electronics? And a friend he modified it for me so that I plug in a jack here and it's on a dial so that it changes the speed of the motor. So now I use this to create accidents and be able to still use vinyl in performances, to capture loops, to do all the techniques we'll see that I do with my bigger machines, but it's like iPhone size, or 2 iPhone sizes, or something like that. And I never use a laptop in gigs because they are completely unreliable. So this is now what I'm down to. This is the 2019 version of Janek and his record players. I think I've left the vari-speed back at the house, but it may not look much, but it's still incredibly powerful. I'm very small. That's the timeline of my turntable. Turntable timeline. That's what that is.
So you've spoken about using notation for one record, I think, but obviously most of your work is improvisational.
Yes. Yep.
How did you develop that notation, and do you still use it in some respect? Or?
So, what do you mean by notation? Connect me back to that moment.
I guess any form of notation.
Okay.
Like,
Yep.
Yeah.
I have a range of different spaces that I use. So if in developing a concert project, I find a 7-inch and I put an A or a B or a C on the record player, or my new one, which is my my Ultra Boyd Rice. You know, I can repeat something that's nice. So if I find an LP and I put on this one here in the middle, on a particular one of my two-arm record player, my twin turntable, I can repeat things that I found enjoyable before. So I'll write on the record label, A, woozy piano, play at 20 RPM or something. And that's what's been nice about my multi-arm record players. I can play them down to like 1.5 revolutions a minute, which is just vibration, really. Anywhere up to 78, so 27, 54, whatever you like. There is no correct placing for speed on my record players. So these are one tool for recreating happy accidents live on stage that I might have discovered before. A lot of those, you know, when I find something in preparations, I usually do like a 1 or 2 minute variation of it that starts back at the beginning, so I can make a loop. And for most of my career, I used mini discs because they're 100% reliable. They're 100% click free on the track transitions when you loop back, and Philip showed me that. So then I'd write out, I had 3 mini discs, I'd write out what all the kind of vibes were on mini disc A, and then I would improvise off that. I don't have a set list. When I do a concert, I'm in sound check. I kind of work out an interesting beginning. I leave it, come back, that's where I start, and then I don't know where I'm going in a concert, usually. So I improvise, extemporize. One of my early collaborators used to call my ABC lists of tracks a cheat list, which wound me up no end, and it was very funny, because he liked to randomly play something in disc and randomly bring up sounds. Fine. But I considered what I did, knowing kind of the vibes of where I might be heading, as like a improvisation saxophonist, knowing all his scales. So you know kind of what you've got in the toolbox, but how you use them during an hour's show will be different. So that's why I justified it. It's always good to be challenged. I often find asking people, they give me an opposite answer. I go, good point. My wife has always given me different feedback to what I'm usually thinking in my brain, and that's always been valuable. And I always like to talk about ideas with everyone. Now, some people say you should never talk about your ideas with anyone because you don't want to share them, but I reflect on about everything in life with everyone, because then you get all these different perspectives of which you can make your own mind. Context, feedback. So that's how I've mostly done concerts over the years. Those different, simple, powerful opportunities.
What kind of things are you thinking about when you're collecting source material? Is it a spontaneous process, or are you looking for specific material per project?
Source material evolves. You have your, it started off with a poetry record. Happened to be there. I wouldn't have gone out looking for that. And that's what I love. Things find you in a way. I've developed my own tastes for not liking certain sorts of things. What's magnificent about using vinyl as a medium for creativity is that anything is possible. There's everything in the world has been put on vinyl in some way or other, everywhere at some point, and it's all sitting there waiting for you. So most enjoyably are the context-specific events that I've done, like the album I made with Philip Jack called Songs for Europe. We spent a week living in Istanbul. We arrived, it was snowy, the whole city was shut, the motorways were closed down, there was a power cut. So we went out and we collected local Istanbul music from the markets with candles. I mean, seriously, how romantic was that? And then we spent a week up in a cold office block, and when the power came on for an hour, we'd make some music. And we also, the second half of that project was going to Athens and doing the same at the foot of the Acropolis. My bedroom actually had a view of the Acropolis, unbelievable, above the music venue. So we spent a week there using Athens music. So it's incredibly variable. The one thing I've never really done is use beat music as an origin, because I've never been able to follow the rules of rhythm. And I will say that it's possibly a cliche, but my earlier work is much more raw and tangible. And like my first concerts I did in like Ghent with Fat Cat, you know, I used to take a lot of gear, put it on the train, and you know, I'd make this quite raw acoustic sets. But over the 25 years or whatever it is I've been doing this, I've searched out beauty as my primary ambition. Concepts, absolutely. Intrigue, yes. But ultimately, I want my music to have some beauty in it. Now, I'm unable to make new age music, which is meant to be beautiful, but most people find horrible. Thank God. So somewhere, I always get log jammed in it being dissonant beauty, like fierce beauty, or, you know, to this day people write to me and in reviews, you know, it's still got that Janek edge to it. You know, 'cause I tried to make the most beautiful thing out, but it's edgy or something. So it means I'm not commercially hugely successful because I'm not popular music. Although I did join Spotify recently, and my top track is a piano piece I did for a promenade concert in a disused mill in Bradford, and it's a piano piece that I made with my 2-arm record player with some I don't know what it is, some well-known piano piece. My friend I was lodging with, he went out to get the world's hottest curry, and by the time he come back, I've made the piece. But it's now got almost 1 million hits on Spotify, which I hate Spotify obviously because they kill all of us with their royalties. But so actually that's my most popular because I think it's most beautiful. So I've go not middle of the road. I don't think that's where I'm at, but I've sought pleasant ambient music, I guess, of one nature or another is where it's become more. You know, my first album out, I wouldn't call that an ambient album. It's drifting, but it's challenging. You know, the last 10 years have been, I try to make beauty. I want to make the world smile, be happier, and I don't always succeed, but some people agree with me.
So maybe I was going to ask about your usual setup, but I guess it's specific to turntables now. How do you use turntables?
Well, I've got it down to my exciting 1-arm record player. Yeah. So in my home studio, I have my 2-arm twin turntable that served me around the world for 10 years, and I think it was time to retire it before it falls apart and it's difficult to travel with. So that's at the heart of my studio. That's where my sound origins percolate from into my guitar pedals and things like that. And I've got here, we'll see, 2 mixers, and you know, this is the essence of what I've been working on for 2 decades. I learned early on that taking vinyls, capturing sounds in, you know, my loop pedal there, the Dodd DFX94 is a 4-second loop pedal that you can layer on. It's from a pre-turntable project, and they've been with me all my career. But in terms of travelling with records and vinyl and everything, with the challenges we have and the practical realities, I'm down to my, what's that called? What's my one arm? I was talking to my neighbour who used to DJ on cassette boxes. I said, yeah, I've got a one arm record player. And he goes, wow, really? I said, yeah, okay, I've got to think of a better phrase for it than that. It hasn't got a catchy title yet. Maybe I can come up with one now. But so vinyl is still ever present in my concerts, but partly because a lot of the sounds I use were recorded before from vinyls. So the acoustics of vinyls, when we're talking about the medium of vinyl is wholeheartedly at the core of my compositional creativity in concert. But practicalities of it are, it's part of the show now. It's not the epicenter. Yeah. It's not the spindle of the show.
And you've collaborated with a lot of different artists, such as Philip Jet. What's your experience of working collaboratively with turntables, and how does this differ from perhaps working solo, or does it just depend on the project?
Well, I'm a sound artist foremost, so anything is possible, and choosing people to work with, I've consciously chosen people older than me, usually, or better than me in certain things, different ways, to kind of draw things, experiences, and friendships, develop friendships. And I haven't done a lot of collaborating, because it's not easy, especially soloists with our particular ways. But on the whole, they become or are friends. So that's foremost. You must retain the friendship, and you know, doing this kind of work and being an artist who does exhibitions and concerts, you have to not be a prima donna, in my opinion. And I may have a big head and a big ego, but I really, really, really like to be a nice person when I get out there. And at the top of my rider it says, I am not a diva. Because I want to work around problems. So collaboration is all about opening avenues, but working around problems and how to resolve them, which is in life is an ongoing challenge for all of us. So, you know, I worked with Robert Hampson way back in 20 years ago now on our project Komai, and he'd come out of a shoegazing rock grunge band called Loop, but he'd very much moved on to trying to do pure electroacoustic music. So he was a big fan of Janek Schaefer and GRM and the French electroacoustic scene. So he very much wanted to go there, and so we did a tour of America and a bit around, and we made an album together. And you know, it was at the right time. I learned a lot of his techniques and vibes, and then and I finally got Philip, like I said, in Athens and in Istanbul. We did our magical project together. And at some point, someone asked me who I'd like to collaborate with. And one of my favourite stories about my becoming an experimental musician was first going to see Charlemagne Palestine. Would have been maybe 96, 97. He was playing a beautiful church in Waterloo next to the station, and my poet friend Mars Champion I was living with said, oh, we must go to this guy, he plays all night, he plays chords all night. I'm like, what, all night long? This was all new to me. I was in my mid-20s, 26, 27. And so we got there, and this very individual person, Charlemagne Palestine, was there, and he did some pianoing with his teddy bears. Individual character, he's being who he is. And then this amazing thing happened. He had 4 speakers around the audience, and he played an excerpt of his new CD, essentially, which is a recording of Brooklyn, where he grew up, of all the hustle bustle, of all the helicopters spiraling around. I thought, okay, he's playing, he's not performing, he's just playing some music. I thought, oh, that's a challenge to me, very early negotiations for my mind to get over. And then he started to walk all around the pew, around the audience. And then he started to walk quickly. And then he started to jog. And then he was running at full speed all around the audience. And at that moment, it was like, wow, I would feel a complete nincompoop if I did that. But it suits him. He is pushing who he is to the full. And in a simple act of just running around the audience playing a soundscape was mind-opening for me. Be who you are, be the best you can be. Push all your weirdnesses out there to please people, to perform, to entertain, to challenge new people. And then he sat down and did his organ piece. It was like, he stuck his bits of paper in the organ we couldn't see. I was like, bloody hell. Like 20 minutes it took for some bass, finally some woomph, to come in. I was like, okay, so I'm learning about duration here. I was new to it, even though my mother was an experimental dancer from the 70s, and I exposed to a lot of interesting stuff back then. As a conscious adult, this was all new to me. And my friend Miles was disappointed because it didn't go on all night. But that gig of Charlemagne's set another hallmark of who I wanted to be. So that's why I wanted to work with on an album, and one way or another we were connected. And he's a bit of a crazy guy. People think I'm a bit weird, but I'm normal really. But he was, to me, was crazier than me. So I went to stay with him, and it was fun. And working around problems is one of the teachers I've learned from doing all this music and art. It's what I teach my children, work around the problem. Daddy, I worked around the problem. Well done, son. And when I got to Charlemagne's the second studio visit there, he wasn't feeling particularly good. Charlemagne said, I'd bought him a set of desk bells, because he loves carillon and all the bell ringing. That's what he did as a child. And I was thinking we were going to do something in studio. He had a massive new studio he's having built. And he goes, I don't really feel like making music today. I was like, wow, okay. How about, Charlemagne, we take the bells out on the road and go and visit that flea market you're talking about. We can go and perform. So we went out on this sound travels journey. We sat down at a cafe and we invited old ladies to play our bells. We had a rapport and that became side 2 of the LP. So, my God, I learned a lot from Charlemagne. And I'm currently working with William Basinski because you may know I like to think a lot, I talk a lot, I like too many ideas. And what I've mentioned I always want to do is calm down. And I think William does that quite well. Wow, he's... So between my madness and his serenity, we might find some magic together. And I think I'm just starting a project with Akira Rabelais, who does beautiful musics in my vein, so we're doing something. I think I've forgotten someone. Who else have I worked with? Someone else. Anyway. So it's not easy to collaborate, but you both benefit by trying to come together.
And then how important is the visual element for, I know you do a lot of visual work outside of the performance work, but how important is it for the performance?
Presentation is fundamental to us, to everything, to the way what hits us and what hits other people. And I certainly learned in architecture, to present really interestingly, to think outside the box. So when it came to being an artist, visual is essential even if it's just the album art. You know, what is that? What does it mean? Where does it come from? How does it communicate? All the way up to doing a full massive installation in a disused Sainsbury's supermarket. You know, what's the experience of, you know, I've talked about processing the world through our ears, and I think our ears win because we can hear around corners. And if you're in a war and there's a sniper around a corner, you can hear them crawling along. If you try and look at them, they'll shoot you. That's one of my strange anecdotes, but I've never been in war. My mother was born in the centre of World War II, which was an inspiration for extended play, my multi-record player piece. But so aesthetics, visual aesthetics, are as important as the sound, probably. If you can make something that's gorgeous but looks crap, if you can make something that's gorgeous and looks awful, maybe if you look awful on purpose, that's okay. But if you do it badly, people aren't going to welcome their ears to listen to what you're doing. And I really, really enjoy making things, creating spaces, creating events and installations. So I think there's definitely a Janek vibe running through the visuals. And I've done most of my album cover arts. I've kind of let other people have plays on them now, which I enjoy. Yeah, eyes are as important as ears when it comes to creating art and music. Yeah.
So future perspectives. What have you learnt from working with turntables, and has this informed your other work in any way, and how might it have?
Hang on, how's that to do with the future? So that's to do with the past into the future, as it were?
Yeah.
Yeah?
I guess so.
Learning to repeat an accident, which becomes the very short future. If you make an accident in a concert, I learnt it myself, repeat the accident, and it seems real. That's definitely true, and working around the problem and finding magic that follows is magnificent. So working with records got me, made a future for myself. That's one kind of answer. I made my own future by making my ThreeArm record player and following it, and pushing it, promoting myself. I mean, I really have had to promote myself to make what has happened the last 2 decades. If I just sit here, phone doesn't ring a lot, certainly at this later stage in my career. So making the future happen by sending out a postcard of a ThreeArm record player and going, hello. And they go, oh, yes, do come over. Here's your rent. Here's some food. Here's some wine. Here's some pats on the back and some applause. I've never been a futurologist. I don't know what the future holds apart from the conglomeration of the past. I'm not getting into philosophy though.
Okay. Probably don't want to answer this then. What do you think the future holds for working with turntables in general, not necessarily?
Well, fortunately, record players are an analog, acoustic medium. So the future is bright for records because the world is littered with them. Now, if you're a digital artist and you've got the wrong OS in 6 years' time, you have to I spent a year trying to migrate to my new laptop, which is 6 years old. Total hell. So the future of all the modern technologies are really problematic for enabling work to propagate into the future that we've done in the past. Like, why I never use a laptop in a gig is because, like, the one time I did, I was at the end of a magical concert. I was playing the sounds of me running down a footpath behind me in the concert venue before I got up and ran down the path behind me with the gravel. And I thought I didn't want the visual light distracting the audience, so I could partially close the lid and it cut off the sound. And it's the only time in a gig that I had just that sound playing. So I was like, very angry. This is the end of a gig. You've got to have a good end to a gig. So what I did is I just threw the record player on. Bingo! Some magic immediately popped up that I could then repair the laptop. So the fact that, I talked about how I use a gramophone for children's parties, and you can bury a record underground. In 1,000 years' time, maybe, 100 years, 10 years' time, you can dig it up, wash it off, it'll still sound like Jerry Lee Lewis, right? And that enables an enormous future. Whether it will ever meet the mainstream of acceptance, I never quite got there. And like we've talked about, there haven't been oodles of people that do the kind of things that my peers do. I think, I come down to the fact that it's a, incredible. I call it black magic. Like, children, do you know where's the sound on this? And they go, oh, it's on the record. I say, where? It's a little wiggly line. And like, when my children were young, I had the gramophone out in the garden, and I wound it up, and I put their fingernails into the groove, and the vibrations come up their fingers, and you can just hear some opera coming out, right? And they were like, it's black magic, and that black magic gives it a powerful future.
That's great.